Our third value at Finder is to go live, which is we have a bias to putting things live on the internet, sometimes a little too early, but hey, it's live. You get the feedback, right? But our feedback's done in public, not in private. We put it out there, and then you get that feedback, and it's vulnerable, and you're learning and you're adapting and you're going live again. And that's our methodology, right? And it's part of it. What we value at Finder. If it's live on the internet, it's celebrated. If it's not on someone's desktop, it doesn't mean shit.
Hi everyone, welcome to episode 117 of the Startup Playbook podcast. I'm your host Rohit, Bhargava, and each week I interview successful founders, investors, and subject matter experts on how they got started, the strategies they used to succeed, and their advice to current and future entrepreneurs. I'm delighted to have Fred Schebesta, the co-founder of Finder, as my guest for this episode. Fred co-founded Finder, a personal finance comparison platform, in January 2006. Fast forward 14 years, and the company has now grown to receiving over 10 million monthly visitors, 400 staff across 6 offices, and expanded to over 80 countries. Alongside this, Fred also led the launch of the cryptocurrency brokerage firm Hivex in 2018, which traded over $100 million in its first year, and also led the launch of the Finder app, which since launching in March 2020 has already received over 37,000 downloads. We covered a range of topics in this interview, including balancing data-driven decisions with gut feel, how to hire for values and cultural fit, structuring growth strategies, how to build Phoenix companies, and much more. Without further ado, here is my interview with Fred Schebesta. Fred, welcome to the Startup Playbook podcast, and thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. So Fred, for those people that may not be as familiar with you or your background, do you want to share a little bit about your story and what got you here today?
Yeah, I was a crafty, internet coder, and I learned to build websites back in sort of 01. And I really, I started building on GeoCities. I don't know if anyone remembers that. That's way back in the day. And, through that construction of websites, I learned to ask my clients what they wanted. They wanted to rank at the top of Google back then, which is, pretty popular now, but wasn't as popular back then. And so we sort of started to learn how to do search engine optimization and all sorts of internet marketing techniques. And we went on to sell that agency back in 2007. And, that was kind of the beginning when I learned all sorts of things about, marketing things on the internet and, websites and things like that. I think, from that early beginning, it taught me the power of traffic and the power of, putting marketing first. And, that experience also taught me every single thing not to do in a business. I made every single mistake possible. On the side, we were experimenting, building little websites and things like that. And one of them, was Credit Card Finder. There was another series of other ones that sort of failed to some extent, or we parked, a poker site, a Sudoku site, a Mother's Day present site. Mother's Day presents only happens one time a year, so it's not the best business to be in. But back then, we were just registering domain names, and I think we've got 1,000 domain names still of business ideas that we sort of shelved. And then over time, this Credit Card Finder business we started going into full time after we did an earn out in 2009, and experienced a big Google penalty in 2010, and got out of Google jail, which was very challenging. And then we just started building up and started doing home loans, personal loans, savings accounts, step by step along the way to build each and every vertical. And I think we've got over 1,000 different comparisons. And and then we started expanding overseas and went over to New York in 2016. That was a journey. 17 we started in the UK. In 19 we started late 19 we started in Canada, in Toronto. which was again a fascinating experience to start again, but it was always fun. It's like a startup in each country, really. And I guess that's where we are today. And we've had a pretty wild ride in 2020, as everyone's probably had, and that's been fun.
Yeah, so many things that I'll pick on, and I'm sure that we'll get to through the interview as well. But Fred, just going back to, you mentioned your agency that you had at the start, and you picked up a lot of lessons through the process. I think startups and business in general is definitely one of the most humbling experiences that one can go through. What were some of the lessons that you sort of picked up in terms of, especially like I've listened back in terms of research for this interview, there's a lot of clarity that it seems that you have for Finder and the vision that you have. But, what were some of the lessons that you picked up from your agency that you've been able to apply, both the good and the bad, for Finder?
Well, the first one is never sell services. If you want to build a really scalable business, I think doing a service business is really hard. And so I vowed never to do services again, unless it was in some sort of scalable way. The other thing is I think we learned a lot about cost control. Cost control has been a big thing, particularly I guess we're cash flow funded as a business. We haven't taken any capital in, or Finder's quite a large business these days. And so, we learned cost control because we were always struggling to some extent in the agency. It's, you live very hand to mouth, and get to the payroll every single month, which is very challenging. I think the other thing I learned is, as I said, I think I mastered and really focused on internet marketing. That's where we have a very core understanding. The founders of Finder know a lot about those topics. Maybe the thing is I should have learned more about is building products on the internet, and that's probably where we weren't as strong. But now we've launched our app now and things like that, and starting to build a really nice little product around that. I don't think that was potentially where we were strong before. We're kind of very weak. And that's not something you learn in an agency. You learn, short term, get a job in, get it out, and you don't really care about the future so much. And so you're very, short term thinking and short term coding, short term campaigns, as opposed to a long term building a brand, building a product. It's a different way of thinking, and it took us a little bit to adapt, but I think now we've gotten a bit close to that. We still got our agileness. You learn from an agency, to pick up stuff and quickly turn it around. And I don't think that'll ever die. But I think that helped us a lot through this, COVID-19 experience a lot. And also, our Google penalty and other major challenges we've had, we're able to adapt quick. I think that's what agencies do really well. I think those are some of the main ones.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you just mentioned really resonated with me. So I ran a digital marketing agency just before my kind of current role as well. And, I think it teaches you a lot about discipline and a lot about, being able to sort of really operationally understand a business. But what you just mentioned in terms of scale, and some of the challenges that come with running services businesses are very true as well. And it's definitely something that has resonated with me as well. Again, you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier as well, but, I imagine, looking now at Finder, you have 10 million monthly visitors, you've got, 400 staff, but in 2006, I imagine the landscape itself was very different, and Finder was obviously just starting to kick off as well. What was there's such a broad range of categories that you're in now, and the business itself is quite massive, but what was that initial step for Finder? What was the category? And I guess, how did you sort of distill what that initial starting point for you was when there were so many different options out there?
Yeah. So I just wanted to rank number one in Google for credit card. That's the key word. And I don't know, that was a bit of a wacky goal, because I think up things like that. And I thought, okay, well, what kind of website, we're going to put there to do that? Because you got to put something there. And I thought, well, I love to educate, and I've lived off a very frugal budget my entire working life as being an entrepreneur. maybe I can share some of that. And I used to live off a credit card, basically. And sometimes it would go over, and just did my best. And I think there are just a lot of a confluence of things that I enjoy. I enjoy finance. I like it. I don't know. It's just something I tend to enjoy. I like technology and I like marketing. I think the confluence of those three things is what kind of brought me to internet businesses, and particularly one that's centered around financial decisions. I think it's also one of the reasons what attracted me to cryptocurrency, because it's the same three confluences of finance, technology, and marketing sort of put together. Probably a bit more economics as well in cryptocurrency, but relatively speaking, still in the finance category. And so then I was just writing about my passion. I was just writing about topics. I didn't need to research necessarily a lot of things. I just sort of thought, how do I approach this situation, and how do I think about this? And then I would read other people's views, and I was like, oh, and I personally wrote the content on the website, and I personally coded the website, and I used to tinker around with the images, and I changed the designs. Like, I have those old school skills. They're not I'm not the most amazing coder, and I'm not a great designer or a great writer, but I'm just dangerous enough to be able to do just enough to get something started and going and figure out how something might work. Technology's changed a lot since 06. WordPress is pretty cool. And there are all sorts of very better SaaS services and things like that. I used Shopify the other day, and I was like, wow, the big leap from OS Commerce, if anyone remembers that. I think that when you mix your personal passion and something you're naturally interested in, and you can pivot that in some way to something that's close to you, but in a different space and very scalable, it's just a good recipe for enjoying what you do every day and being successful, because and maybe I didn't realize that. I guess I've always been a bit of a rebel at school, and a rebel in as a child. I used to, I didn't, just to give context, I didn't used to, build businesses or whatever when I was a kid. I used to, ride bikes and climb trees and these things that, kids don't do that much. Well, some do, but, we used to walk through the bush and stuff like that, which is kind of, I think, but that was very much about my curiosity about the world and experimenting and seeing what's out there and learning about and being very independent. And I think that's always been a big streak of mine. And so, in terms of building a company, I always looked at myself to being, if we need to solve something or do something, it's going to come back to me. I need to solve that. I'm not sure if I had this big vision of what Finder is today. It was more, I just wanted to share what I knew and combine some of the skills that I had and hopefully achieve a pretty arbitrary goal. And I think that's a pattern throughout my life. I just, and maybe this is not the right approach or wrong. I just sort of set a purpose and I just make up a goal and I go, I'm going to go do that. That seems random, but I think the other day I've been talking about, I want to get a sneaker deal. And it's for no other reason than that's just what I want to go and do. And, it's just what I need to go do that. Okay, I'm going to reverse engineer that and figure that out. I'm going to find the people, find the crew, hang out with the right people, read some information, serendipitously go about and combine my personal skills as best I possibly can and combine them together to make something which helps the customer solve a problem.
Very cool. I think it's the same as kind of building a business, right? Like you have a very, if you identify a problem or have a kind of clear vision or goal that you're sort of building towards, like it's much easier to figure out what that path looks like. But if you have it's very difficult to optimize for something if you don't know what you're optimizing for. So at least if you know what your kind of endpoint is or what you're trying to achieve, you can sort of meander and figure out what the best process is to get there. So Fred, again, like, really curious to kind of find out a little bit more about that. So, you mentioned that you were really started off as kind of like a passion project and you were kind of doing everything. What was that sort of turning point for you that was kind of indicated to you that this was more than just something on the side and more than, I guess, just your passion and something that you could actually build a business around?
Yeah, so my business partner, Frank Rastusha, he's been working with me since 2003. And I feel very honored that he would actually consider even doing that, given, I sort of push the limits continuously and I'm always creating things. So he's probably seen, I don't know how many creations, and there's a pretty solid graveyard of failures. And we can talk about those as well if you want. There's some successes as well, right? And Frank always set this bar with me to say, hey, and it was very early on, here's an idea, and I said, here's an idea, and I think this will really work. And he said, well, it's not a business till the cash is in the bank. And so I remember the day we were, I can't remember. It just started getting mobile phones. Mobile phones started to become a bit of a thing. Smartphones, and I called him up and I said, "What are you doing on Friday?" And he said, "Nothing." I said, "Good, because we're going to dinner." And he said, "Why is that?" I said, "Well, I promised the guys that when we hit $25,000 in revenue, we would go out to dinner. And so can you come along?" And just as he was about to speak, I said, "Oh, and I just sent you an email with the $26,743.18 that's currently in our bank account to show that the money is already there. So I'll see you on Friday." And I don't think it was in as slick a form as that's probably a slightly embellished story to a large extent. I think every story is, but it definitely went along that way. And we had dinner, and I think that, but is the moment, right? Is when this business started making quite significant revenue, and everything we did added to what we were doing, and it started to grow. And we hit these pockets all the time on the internet where we get these, bursts of growth. And it's like a computer game. We're constantly mining the internet and finding new pockets and new areas to go and expand the business model into. But I think that was a really important moment. That was a moment when we celebrated, a pretty solid win. And I think really those are the moments where you reflect and you can feel this is a going concern. This is not just a hobby. This is a real something here. I don't think we saw it was called Credit Card Finder back then, to give you context. So it's not like, it wasn't like there was no vision of where this could go. You think about, oh, maybe we could do it in home loans as well. Oh, we'll register that domain name, whatever, but we just wanted to just, figure out how do you build a website, and how do you get, customers, and get partners and big banks to come and join you. And we've worked with the big banks for a long time. They're great. Banks are hard to run. I have so much respect for banks. They're big enterprises, and people inside them have to wrangle and get them to do amazing things. And so I have so much respect for big banks, insurance companies, telcos. They're amazing. You can't just pivot like, you can just turn to your mate in a startup and go, "Hey, do you reckon we could do this? Yeah, let's do that." Okay, done. You got to have quite a few meetings and presentations and pitches and budgets and timings and alignment and resources, and people go away, people get sick, and there's just more complications. So I have a lot of empathy for that And I think that's the advantage, right? In being a startup is you can move quick like that.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things about building businesses is, you touched on earlier that at the start you were writing all the content, you were doing all of the updates to the site, but you can't keep doing it alone, and especially at scale. And a large part of that is building the right sort of team and right structure around you. And from what I understand, you've got a team of over 400 staff now. What is it specifically that you look for in people? I think you've also mentioned that one of your kind of core skill sets that you do, or something that you spend a lot of time for at Finder, is helping find the right people to join the business. What are the specific characteristics or type of people that you look for, and how do you identify that?
Yeah, so I maybe I do this unconventionally, and that's what I started doing in the beginning, and I never stopped. I wrote the first employment contract. I don't know how legal some of the things I've written in that were, but there's still large amounts of it that still stay today. And one of them was the code of conduct. This is how we expect you to conduct yourself in this company. And by signing this document, you agree to that code of conduct. And I think that's important, right? And you can set out those principles that you agree to and that you don't agree to, and then you can reference that. I don't know how legal that is or not. Some of the things are pretty outrageous, I'd say very outrageous. But that was the tone I set from the beginning. I said, this is how we're going to roll in this place. This is not a place for hand-holding. This is not a government agency. This is not a charity. This is a seriously run enterprise of people who want to get together and do their life's greatest work. And if you don't want to join that, that's fine. You don't have to sign this piece of paper. And in fact, it says, don't sign this piece of paper several times in that employment contract. If you don't want to conduct yourself in this way and aspire to greatness or whatever it may be. So I think that's the actual foundation stone. What does your employment contract look like? And I just sort of broke the mold because I was over it. I think it's been sort of slightly adjusted today and modernized to a large degree, but that code of conduct remains. Then I think the other thing I looked for certain attributes and behaviors in people. And the way in which I would do that is I read this book called Top Grading back in, would have been 2009. It's a long time ago. And it kind of taught me about, really, digging in and understanding your crew and understanding and setting problems and tasks to achieve and try and see the behaviors that you're expecting. So, I look for, as an example, I look for proactivity. That's one of the things I love. I think proactive people are incredible, and you don't have to hold their hand. And if there's a hole in the boat, they'll try and fix it. And and that's one of the things we find. With our one crew, we've got 5 values. The first one's one crew. Everyone's on the same team. There's only one crew at Finder, and if it's a hole in the boat, it's everyone's problem. So we take responsibility for the issues, and we own that as a crew. And a way I sort of test for that is I don't give the address of where the interview's happening. Like if you can't go on the internet and find our address, then maybe you should probably find a different company, because that's what we do. It's in the name. And I think that's a basic thing, right? But it kind of, my methodology, and maybe it's not right or it's wrong or it's unorthodox, but I kind of, if I'm hiring a salesperson and we have an interview, I don't call them back. I just wait. And if they don't call me, and I'm going to ignore the first call, and I'm going to ignore the second call, and I'm going to ignore the third call. If you can't sell me on speaking to me, you ain't going to sell for Finder. And that's what great salespeople do. They persist and they get through, and they get, roles at Finder, and they go on to be extremely successful. And that's the kind of hustle, and that's the kind attitude and behavior that I'm self-selecting for. And I remember that, I've had crew that now work at Finder, and they've been working for a long time, that called me, repeatedly on my phone. And one of them, I actually said, and it's a famous story, I actually told him, I don't think you're right for this company. And he proceeded to sell and explain to me all the reasons why. And I was, I ignored that. And then eventually I realized, he is not stopping. And that's the kind of person I want on my team. And so, through these self-selection processes, sure, they might be unorthodox, unconventional. They're the crew that I look for, and they're the crew that have been with me for, some have been with me for like 10 years now.
Yeah, obviously a very sort of unique way of hiring, but I can understand why it kind of brings in a specific set of characteristics and profile into the business, which is important when, as you said, you're kind of one crew and all pulling in the one direction. But so on that as well, like I was doing research for this interview. One of the things that you mentioned in a prior interview a couple of years ago was, how difficult it was when you do have a team and you are kind of scaling when, especially I imagine a company like Finder is very data driven. There is so much data that you're kind of collecting, and that is kind of the core of what the business is. But balancing that with a gut feel of where the potential market or future opportunities are heading as well, and specifically in reference to moving into crypto and the focus into crypto as well, was something that I think you'd mentioned was a challenge to get the rest of the team on board with that. And I think that can be sometimes a little bit difficult from a founder perspective as well, as when you see an opportunity or when you see something that there aren't a huge amount of data points around, but you feel like there's an opportunity. Trying to wrangle the whole team to get behind that sort of direction can be difficult at times as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about what did that sort of process and structure look like for you in trying to convince, or what were some of the ways that you went around doing that?
Cryptocurrency as a I guess a technology and I guess a financial instrument is very new, and new things in general scare people. You go back in time, people thought that electricity was going to kill them. I think there's a lot of debate about 5G right now. People didn't used to catch lifts because they assumed they would die. I remember when, I'm sure everyone might remember this as well, is when internet payments were dangerous. And now we just put billions and billions of dollars through the internet. So, a lot of technologies and a lot of anything new has an adoption curve. And I think what I try and do is, and probably what I was challenged by with that is that cryptocurrency was seen as potentially as a dark thing, and there's some negativity around it. But everything has, right? Everything brand new has. There's also a lot of good things. And I think one of the things I really try to focus on with that is just reporting and being very transparent on the numbers, being transparent on the traffic, and everyone could see it and see the opportunity and how we approach that. And I think it was great. But I don't think as an organization we had experienced such a profound new piece of territory and new technology that worked really well for our business, and how to ingest that. And so we had a lot of challenges and growing through that. Today, but reflecting back, cryptocurrency as a market, it's a very in a market that we understand really well, and we help our members understand that on Finder all the time. But I think it's something which we did take a lot of growing pains to go through. How did we actually get people on that journey? Well, as I said, I think we showed the numbers, and had to communicate it probably. I used to walk around and talk about it. I sort of, I don't know what other people do, but my process is to walk the floor. It's tougher now with everyone working from home, but I'll just walk around and talk to people and talk about what's happening and tell the stories and explain, where we're at and why we're doing this and just generally about it. And, all of those things you'd imagine, all the newsletters and all the Confluence docs and all the, you'd imagine they'd all sum up to being, so that everyone has a shared understanding and context about something, but that's normally not the case. It actually, you don't have to repeat that probably quite a few times as you scale, right? As you have more and more people, because there's just so many messages and so much attention that's being drawn from all sorts of areas of the company that you can't expect everyone to stop and focus and understand exactly what something is. And so when something new comes in, it's kind of like, why are we distracting away from this call? Why are we doing this? And I understand that. I fully comprehend that. And actually think it's probably really healthy that companies do that, because otherwise they wouldn't be so consistent and they wouldn't be where they are without staying consistent. And, it's like in the body when a foreign object comes in and the antibodies kick it out. And that's what should happen in a company, right? New ideas should be kicked out because we're doing really good ideas already and carry on. But there are moments where, as a founder, I think you've got to go, no, hold on a second. That is the normal process and that's what should happen. But this one's different. And, over time, you're you got to be that shot caller. That's your role. You're the one that you're the one that has to break the system and disrupt it, because you made that system. You live in that system. You actually thrive from the system that you actually personally created. And I think what's, instructive about that and what helped, through that experience is, as a business, we, it actually, it created a cultural divide to some extent, and sort of was a litmus test about, what's going to happen in the future, where, times are getting more crazy and more changes happening even faster. And that was a big one. And it kind of like showed, this is what this business is going to do. We're going to adapt and we're going to change, and it's always going to happen that way. And, we got a cultural acceptance of that inside the company. I think it also highlighted for some people that maybe they didn't enjoy that, and that's fine as well. Changing and pivoting and moving and adapting, and that's fine as well. But I think it set up a platform and a process and something we've recreated a few times now of how we adapt and pivot and form up teams, or, what we call one crews, or like I think people traditionally call squads. And then they dissolve and move on to other things, and they build up around this one, and then they dissolve and they move on. And that happens all the time. And I think it's a lot like a circus. You deploy the tent, everything comes on. Now there's security people, and then when the tent gets removed and the show's over, then that deploys and we move into transport mode. And I think Finder can build tents real fast now, and something we learned and adapted from that. But yeah, I don't think in the beginning it's something we were culturally ready for and understanding of and accepting of. And it does have impacts on other timelines for other things, don't get me wrong. And it's not easy to deal with that. And it should rightfully be pushback inside the company against these ideas and testing them. But I do think there comes a point when you, as the founder, you got to make that call.
Absolutely. I guess kind of taking this into the context of kind of growth and marketing for Finder as well. You've been running the company for 14 and a half years now. And, marketing in itself, or kind of different, you mentioned when you first got started in your agency previously, Google was very new in terms of kind of ranking, and you're really sort of learning and becoming an expert at that at a very early stage. But obviously with the advent of social media, paid acquisition, multiple different kind of channels and opportunities coming out, how do you sort of think about structuring growth and sort of ongoing consistency with things that are already working with you, such as your kind of content marketing strategy, with, trying and testing new channels and approaches? And like, again, like what kind of, like, do you use metrics or frameworks to like help you determine whether a particular channel is working or not working, or you've just got to pivot on your strategy for that?
Yeah, I think we're always testing and learning. That's kind of baked into our internet marketing culture. And we constantly try new channels and new ways. It's some of the challenge, it gets a little bit challenging the further and further you go, because you're still mastering other parts. And there's so much depth to some of the channels, that are already out there. So yeah, I guess we're not as stretching as much as we used to. We're kind of trying to master and automate and, really structure and get right what we're doing. But in the beginning, yeah, we definitely push the boundary for a little too far at times. I think zooming out, but what you're sort of submitting is, how do you balance innovation with core and sort of kind of expansion? And that's always been a bit of a challenge, and I think it's different times. I think we focused on core a lot for the first 5 years, a little bit of expansion, and then 16, 17, 18 was a lot about expansion, a bit more than core. And now we're kind of swung back a bit, and we're really trying to build our core, actually rebuild it, which is brutal, like get your fundamental infrastructure and reinvent that so you can go faster and be more scalable and, have more metrics and things like that. But I think of recent, I'd say since 18, for us, we've looked at sort of venture stuff where we're, making big bets. And it's not huge amounts of the company's budget, but it's definitely, a solid part of it. But yeah, it's one of those, I think, triggers and moments in time where you need to change. You change that up and you go and do that. But yeah, it's never an easy balance, that. And I just think in the beginning, it's good to really focus on the core to start with. And depending on where you're at, and how fast you're growing, it could be time for expansion, but most of the time it should be about core, I think, for the start. It depends, again, if you're venture funded or, you have different metrics and different requirements. So, that changes all those variables. I can't give a prescription. I just think I try and break it down into those 3 buckets.
Yeah. I mean, again, sometimes, especially like, I guess taking the specific example of marketing, sometimes you can approach a particular channel, and for whatever reason, based on timing, based on type of format or the type of content, for example, things might not work, but it doesn't mean that specific channel might not be a really interesting leverage point for you. So again, going back to an example, I think you had mentioned on another interview that you had launched a podcast for Finder, which didn't give you the traction that you were really looking for, but I think you've launched another podcast since then, specifically on crypto, that's doing really well. How do you, I guess, again, like, as the founder, as the leader, like, how do you sort of determine what things you decide to sort of double down on, what things are things that you just need to kind of pivot slightly, or what are things that you need to kill and sort of move on?
It's never easy. I think a lot of that has sort of decentralized to some extent, with the different CEOs of Finder, and they make, considered investment decisions. I think there are some principles around it. But, I think it's kind of like we've got an idea, and the high level thought is, when we first do it, it may not work the first time, but we're committed and we know there's something here, and we'll keep committing and keep testing until we find that answer. And I think that comes back to some of the things we did. It took us a good solid 4 attempts to build our mobile phone comparison. We rebuilt that thing, 4 times before it actually worked, and is a successful, I guess, business for us. And that takes a lot of capital, right, to go and do. But we know there's something there. We just don't know necessarily all of the parts that need to go together in the right way for us and for the customer. I just think it's a commitment that, to continuously test and learn. I think that's baked straight into the core of Finder.
again, one of the things that I love that you said in a previous interview was, you really think about Finder as a Phoenix company rather than a unicorn company. And the point being, the constant sort of reinvention of the business. And it's obviously a theme that's kind of come up quite a few times during our chat already. Again, I think having run businesses in the past, like, it can be so easy to spend all of your time just reacting to particular things that are coming at the moment, or just really focus on kind of short-term activity. Are there particular frameworks? Is there a strategy? Like, how do you give yourself the time, space, and energy to really think about, thinking about the long term, or thinking about innovative ways of, thinking big about the business? And how do you, if at all, like, how do you sort of share that with the rest of the team, or allow them to do that as well?
Yeah, so we have global leadership meetings, on a regular basis, where all the leaders around the world obviously call in, and we talk about ideas. And I regularly, I don't think I'm just the ideas person. There's all sorts of people who have ideas in the company, and some of them just need encouragement, and we encourage them. Our third value at Finder is to go live, which is we have a bias to putting things live on the internet, sometimes a little too early, but hey, it's live. You get the feedback, right? But our feedback's done in public, not in private. We put it out there, and then you get that feedback, and it's vulnerable, and you're learning, and you're adapting, and you're going live again. And that's our methodology, right? And it's part of it. What we value at Finder. If it's live on the internet, it's celebrated. If it's not on someone's desktop, it doesn't mean shit. You know what I mean? Like, quite literally. And I think that's that passion, right? That's that direct thing that we value, and people know. So it's baked into the, it's not just the operating system, it's in the hardware. That's the level in which that proactivity and testing and pushing things out and retesting them, that's the level that we think of it at Finder. And I think that served us. It's a bit crazy at times. It's tough because there's so many things going live and all those things are happening. But it's exciting, and you're working with some of the best crew to do this. And I think it just, you feel a great amount of satisfaction in that. And the sheer, I guess, satisfaction you get from putting things live on the internet is something which we all share. And there's nothing like going live. It's like the best motivator, the best hit you can get, and it boils down to one thing. And I ask everyone this all the time. I said, how can we go live, not tomorrow, but now, right now? What do we need to do to press the button to go live right now? If we're going to press the button live, can we do it right now? Well, let's do it. Let's do it right now. And, after it's live, people go, wow, it's live. And then you go, whoa, we should change it and fix this. Okay, cool. Let's go live again. And, and that's that cycle. So I'm not sure if there's a, like a seminar or something. It just, people know the extremity of that process and that method and what we believe from, because it's in the value of the company. That's what we value in everyone. That's how seriously we take that.
Final question for me before we shift gears and move to audience Q&A. So again, you kind of touched on the values of sort of going live. And I think one of the things that's been really fascinating is on this podcast has been just interviewing a lot of successful founders and really kind of distilling the values that they really put in, the values and culture that they put into the business, because it is a trade-off. You can't do everything. And so again, one of the quotes that I think I heard, like either read or heard you speak was, 50% of the people that kind of come onto the site don't go on to be your customers, and that's fine, because you're not trying to turn everyone into a customer. You're really helping people make better decisions, and that's kind of the vision and the ethos that you're putting behind the product. Again, for kind of early stage founders that are maybe sort of navigating and figuring out what those sort of value systems look like for themselves, is there anything in particular that helped you distill what that was like, or are there particular resources or ways that founders can figure out what that should be like for their company?
Yeah, I think, start with the attitudes and behaviors that are already in the people that you have hired and the people that are around you, and the things that what are those attitudes and behaviors that you think are great? And yeah, you can't choose all of them. And don't just choose like integrity or trust. Like, that's par for the course. And that they're fundamentals, and that I guess I challenge people on their values all the time. And the key question you want to ask yourself is two things. One, what is the attitudes and behaviors that people have inside the company that are currently acting, and maybe try and put some words to that. And how would you describe that? What is the thing? And for us, go live we actually say that constantly. We don't say do it, we say go live. Or yes, that's approved, go live. That's what we say. We say go live. And there's a channel called Go Live, and there's a mug, and it's like a badge, and it's like an honorable thing, like people love going live. And the second thing I would submit is try and make one like your values so that people can remember them. If it's like too wordy, or if it's like just generic, get something else. It's just not enough. And the best ones, you want to put is something, they've got to be simple enough that people say them. They're great, because, one crews in our, we call them, they're actually written, a one crew around this project and a one crew this, and you can say one crew. There's like words around that, and straight up, and, master your craft. And I think that people say those things in Finder. But I think if you can, the ultimate ones is when you set something which is shocking. If you say something shocking, like a shocking rule. And, I think Atlassian has don't bullshit the customer or something like that. And that's one of their values. Pretty strong, pretty shocking. But, it means something. And for us, go live is a pretty, culturally challenging value. People will get very concerned about the quality and when should we go live. And, it's uncomfortable to go live with something which is not quite fully perfect, and those kind of things. And it just makes everyone explain to each other, what does that mean? And there's a conversation that happens at the back of that continuously, and explaining what is the requirements to going live. And we're absolutely focused on that. And that's what we're going to go and do. And we're going to celebrate that big time. And, that just drive and that value and that behavior is what you want to see that comes out the back of it. And that's what we value at Finder. And that might not be what for everyone, right? Other people have different values. That's our value. That's what works for us. And don't copy other people's ones, because you're not that company. You're your company. And ask yourself, what are those behaviors that you as a company need?
Absolutely. And I think to your point, like same thing with Atlassian, and obviously same thing with Finder as well, is, these are values that you live on a day-to-day basis. They're not just something that you put up on a wall and people occasionally look at or sign off on their employment contract. It's how you sort of operate and make decisions on a daily basis, and probably get hired for as well. On that note, Fred, we're going to switch over to some audience Q&A. So thank you to all of you that have submitted questions. Again, just a reminder, if you have any questions, please submit them through the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. So the first question is from an anonymous attendee who wants to know, what are some of the challenges when you started Finder in new countries? What are things a founder needs to keep in mind before entering a new market?
Yeah, so thank you for your question. I think the first thing is go to that country. I don't know, it's challenging right now, but I'd still do it. Just get on a plane and go there. And hang out with other businesses and go to the, the industry events or whatever it may be, and learn. Just be around the people. And I went to the UK in 2010, but we didn't launch till 2017. I went to the US, so many times, 12, like all throughout time, 11, like years, 5 years before, and just continuously learning and understanding the market and ingesting it and taking it in and thinking about it. And then when we were ready, then we could go into that market. But, for us, that's obviously because of, we're obviously cash flow funded and, bootstrapped. It's not it's a different timeline. So I don't think that it's necessarily the way everyone's going to approach those things. The other thing I try and do is you need to become a local as fast as possible. And that's not easy to do. But, go and hang out in the places locals hang out. Don't be a tourist. Go and be a traveler. And, eat in the restaurants. Don't eat at the tourist restaurants. Eat at the local ones. Eat at the places that the tourists don't go to. In fact, if tourists are there, you're in the wrong spot. That's not that country. You're not understanding the people and I think it's going to find like food and industry events tend to help that. If you can go to someone's house and understand it, that's the ultimate. Because then you can really empathize, and you want to see the scenes and setups that your product's probably going to be in, so that when you're thinking about it from 14,000 miles away in Australia on this little island, you need to remember that moment. And those are the stories, and they're the things you're going to regale to other people when you come back.
I'm going to pick out this question because it's a good question, but also because we didn't get to touch on this during the interview. But it's submitted by Bryce Chi, who wanted to know what were some growth lessons when launching the Finder app this year, and was it in the pipeline for a while, or did it get, or was it also pushed due to everything going on around COVID?
Yeah, so we've been building it for maybe a year. So we started a long time before. When we launched it in March, it was pretty tough because obviously the news was completely blocked. We managed to get one story live, but it's been very challenging, no doubt. And that's changing. The market's settling down. I definitely think that, if it was slightly different times, it might have gotten a few more bites in terms of publicity. But we got a good kick downfield, and I don't really mind starting. So I always think there's two things. There's when you launch something, you get that big spike, and then it kind of drops off. I actually enjoy the grind more than the spike, and the grind of just consistently and continuously improving and getting customers. And I think that's what we've really experienced and we're learning from now, which I think is actually great. And that's really where you want to shine. You don't want to shine in just the spike. The spike's just, everyone has a launch story, but not many people have a grind story.
Excellent. And final question before we end this interview is submitted by Kushal Bolka, who wants to know, what advice would you give to a beginner to improve and upgrade themselves given the current situation around COVID? So I guess expanding on this from a founder perspective, especially, it was a very challenging time for a lot of businesses during this kind of current period. What are some lessons, some takeaways? How can founders use this particular experience to better themselves and their business moving forward?
Now is one of the greatest times to start your company. There are so many people that are like in defense mode, not knowing what to do, where to go. They're like, everyone's holding on to what they've got. Everyone's very scared. And so if you launch right now, you'll actually have one of the biggest and best opportunities because there'll be much less competition. just to give context as well, we went full time into Finder in 2009, and that's during the middle of the financial crisis. So that's just to give you context. Wasn't easy to do, but was a good sort of blank spot. And as you get more and more context of the world, it can actually just bring more and more noise. And sometimes I just think it's all a bit of noise, really. And all you actually should really focus on when you're starting out is just your first customer and making $1 and getting that cash in the bank. So I think it's a great time to just get out there and try things, experiment. You can't, once you hit rock bottom, you can't go any further. So there's only a sort of up. And I think the ultimate thing and skill that I think you can start to learn and do is to go out and speak to your customers and ask them what they need and what they want.
On that note, Fred, thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning. And thank you to all of you for taking the time out of your busy mornings as well to join us. Thank you for listening to episode 117 of the Startup Playbook podcast. As always, full show notes from this interview will be available at startupplaybook.co. For those of you that have been following the podcast for a while, you'll know that my first 100 plus episodes were all done in person. But due to COVID, we decided to switch up the format and do these as live interviews over Zoom. Unfortunately, this has meant that I haven't been able to control the audio quality as much as I would normally, but it does allow me to bring on some amazing overseas guests that I may not have been able to interview in my previous format. And next week's guest is a great example of this. I'm delighted to be welcoming Cal Henderson, the co-founder and CTO of Slack and the former co-founder of Flickr, on this podcast as my guest for episode 118. We go live at 8 a.m. Tuesday the 30th of June, Australian Eastern Daylight Time. And the link to register for this event is tinyurl.com/ep118 Slack. I'll add a link to this registration page into the show notes for this episode at startupplaybook.co. I'm really looking forward to this interview and hope that you can join us. But in the meantime, if you enjoyed this interview, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. As always, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.